The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
One day when they were together in Galilee, Jesus said to his disciples, "The Son of Man is going to be handed over into the power of men. They will put him to death, and on the third day he will be raised to life again." And a great sadness came over them. When they reached Capernaum, the collectors of the half shekel came to Peter and said, "Does your master not pay the half shekel?" "Oh yes," he replied, and went into the house. But before he could speak, Jesus said to Simon, "What is your opinion? From whom do the kings of the earth take toll or tribute? From their sons or from foreigners?" And when he replied, "From foreigners," Jesus said, "Well then, the sons are exempt. However, so as not to offend these people, go to the lake and cast a hook. Take the first fish that bites, open its mouth, and there you will find a shekel. Take it and give it to them for me and for you." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ, we come across one of the predictions of Jesus' death. And you can imagine the sadness that overcomes the disciples of Jesus hearing when he says that he's going to be handed over and is going to die. You can imagine the sadness that overcomes a family, that befalls a family when one of its members, or maybe a breadwinner of that family, says that he has been diagnosed with a terminal disease. People will feel sad, people feel terrible about that. And others could even get depressed from that, because they know once this person goes, then we're going to have a very difficult time. And it does not only go for death, but also there are moments that we suffer a lot from different things, and that puts us in a very down and dark situation. We feel it's so difficult to cope. So the difficulty of the disciples of Jesus is based on what he says. But one thing that happens in this gospel is that when Jesus talks about his prediction, he does not only end with death and suffering, but he also talks about he will rise again. But the apostles do not pick up that line. They only focus on the fact that he is going to suffer and to die. But he says, "On the third day I will rise." And we know when Jesus rose from the dead, the disciples were filled with joy. Like John's Gospel says in John chapter 20, verse 20, that the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. They forgot about all the sufferings that they went through. They forgot about the distress and the sadness that they went through when he suffered. Even during his prediction, they were filled with a lot of sadness. And Jesus does not only promise us death. It's true, when we think about death, it's very painful, but most of the time we forget about the life that Jesus has promised each and every one of us. When we go through suffering, it is true, there are many times we suffer. And St. Paul, many times he talks about this. He says that the sufferings of this world, in the letter to the Romans, chapter 8, the sufferings of this world are nothing compared with the glory that we shall receive. Okay? It's not about what we see now, what we encounter, but the glory that comes after that. In Romans 5, he says that our suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces a character, and a character gives hope. And once we have hope, there is nothing that can overcome us. So the sufferings in itself can be bad, it is true. But sufferings are not always meant to be an end in itself. Jesus promises us the glory after the suffering. And it can become redemptive when we think more of the glory than of the suffering and the torture we are going through. That we think in anticipation of the glory that we receive after the suffering. Because suffering is not meant to be for itself, especially when we submit it to Jesus, when we bring it back to Jesus, and we bring our sufferings and we lay them before Jesus. What really brings us distress is when we begin to own the suffering and feel it is an end in itself. Then we are going to suffer. And many people do not live even to endure that suffering or to overcome that suffering. Many people take their lives on the way because they feel that suffering is too much. If only we could wait for the glory. Sufferings are not an end in itself. Jesus does not say you are going to die, and that is it. He says there would be resurrection after death. Jesus did not only talk, it was not only about a Good Friday, but also about Easter. It's not only about Jesus dying like he says in the Gospel, but he's going to rise again. In John's Gospel, he gives an analogy of a woman who is in the pain of childbirth. When any woman is in labor, it's so difficult. It's a very painful experience. But once a child is born, they quickly and so suddenly forget the suffering that they went through during the labor. And the same thing happens with our persecutions, especially. And of course, Jesus did not promise us that it's going to all be rosy. He did not promise us a smooth path. He did not promise us that it's going to be all good and it's going to be all enjoyable. He actually said we are going to carry the cross every day. Not once in a week or once in a month or once in a lifetime. He says we are going to carry the cross every day. If you want to be a follower of mine, you must pick up your cross and carry it every day. And it is in the carrying of the cross that is our redemption. We must remember that suffering must come to all at some point. Difficulties and challenges must come to each and every one of us at some point. But we must focus on the glory. We must be able to hand that to Jesus at his feet. And once we surrender that to Jesus, who says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are overburdened, and I will give you rest." Once we surrender that to Jesus, then we can concentrate on the glory, because that is what he's going to do. And our sufferings become redemptive when we offer it, even for poor souls in purgatory, and say, I want to suffer. I offer this suffering that I'm going through for the poor souls in purgatory, or for the sins of my ancestors, or for the sins of my family members who had done some terrible things in the past, and they didn't have a chance to go through penance, and I'm suffering the penance of them. And it becomes redemptive in that way. So just like Saint Maximilian Kolbe, he had his life and he had a right to live, but he offered his life for a family, for somebody who was to die, and he said, it's better I die because this person has a family to look after. And he died because he focused not on the death in himself, but on the glory that he receives after that death. My dear brothers and sisters, it is true, many difficult things we encounter in our day-to-day life, but we must ask God for the grace, especially to endure, to persevere, because suffering or death is not an end in itself, but the glory that comes after that.